And we start with a historic conversation between President Obama and Iranian President Rouhani. In just the last hour, actually this afternoon, the White House confirmed that the two men spoke with each other over the phone about a nuclear deal. Now, this marks the first time a U.S. president and Iranian leader have spoken in more than 30 years. Here was the president addressing the significance of this call.
The very fact that this was the first communications between an American and Iranian president since 1979 underscores the deep mistrust between our countries, but it also indicates the prospect of moving beyond that difficult history.
Meanwhile, at the United Nations in New York City, it's been a busy week for the General Assembly. But as we reach Friday, the diplomats' labors are starting to bear fruit. Thursday evening, we learned that the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council had agreed to a draft resolution put forward by the United States and Russia that compels Syria to give up its chemical weapons stockpiles. An official vote in the Security Council may come as soon as this evening. Now, throughout these negotiations, the main point of contention centered on Chapter 7 measures, which allow for military and non-military actions. 3 of the 5 members of the Security Council, the US, France, and the UK, wanted a resolution to contain Chapter 7 measures as punishment if Syria fails to hand over its chemical weapons. But the 2 other permanent members, Russia and China, opposed any Chapter 7 measures. The agreed-upon draft resolution does not contain any Chapter 7 measures, meaning that if Syria doesn't comply, the UN will have to pass a second measure to approve any military or non-military actions like strikes or sanctions. So where do things go from here? Joining me now is RT's Anastasia Churkina, who's been in New York City covering the UN General Assembly all week. As I mentioned, there's a major breakthrough on Syria in the Syrian resolution that took place yesterday. We are now expecting it to be voted on shortly. What led to it? What's the timeline? And what happens next?
Sam, this resolution is really seen as a diplomatic breakthrough because for weeks, if not days, if not months, really, the U.S. and Russia were at a deadlock in terms of how to proceed when it comes to Syria because of the opposing positions, because of the U.S. insistence that the use of force should be included in a Security Council resolution, whereas Russia was completely against this idea. And with this latest breakthrough that happened on Thursday, we now are expecting the Security Council to vote on this text later today, this evening, and it will not, like you said, include the clause of use of force, something that is seen as a major development in the story, of course, because this was something that the U.S. was pushing really strongly for. Where we stand now is after this resolution is voted on by the Security Council, we will be looking forward to a Geneva conference where all parties involved and key negotiators will try to proceed with a political transition taking place in Syria in a peaceful, diplomatic manner, hoping that all sides will be able to negotiate this process calmly and politically. In terms of the timeline, how much it's going to take to solve the Syrian crisis is certainly a huge question mark that remains, but we're just going to have to wait and see. But this is definitely a big development because countries have been butting heads over this for a very long time.
Now, Anastasia, you spoke exclusively with the Syrian foreign minister today. How is Syria planning to carry out what they've signed up to in terms of the chemical weapons being put under international control?
Well, Sam, all of this is certainly being done under a tight watch of experts from the United Nations and the international community being the key negotiators that came up with this agreement, namely Russia and the U.S. We do know that speaking with the Syrian foreign minister today, he did tell us that the Syrian government is happy to do this, but they are concerned that terrorist groups being supplied support from the outside, from neighboring countries, namely, would get in the way of this to try to hinder this operation. Take a listen to what he told us.
Under the existing circumstances of war on the ground ongoing, how much in control is the Syrian government of the chemical arsenal?
Well, we control the chemical arsenal, but we are worried that the terrorist group also has chemical weapon, and they want to use it to show the West that Syria is not committed to its commitments.
We also discussed, Sam, with the Syrian foreign minister whether or not the threats from the U.S. that were coming earlier were something that had what kind of impact this had on Syria's decision to hand over these chemical weapons. Listen to our conversation about that.
When Syria does hand over its chemical weapons, do you think there's still a possibility of a threat from the West that would remain?
Always the threat from the West is remaining. But before, they are using this threat indirectly through supporting the armed group, the terrorist group. But we take in our account that any country which is not yielding to the American pressure or yielding to the American will, it is under threat.
Why do you think it is that there's so much doubt in the West that the Syrian government will comply with what has been agreed with handing over these weapons?
Because this is part of their plan, anti-Syrian plan. Even before starting to execute our obligation, they start to put doubts.
Well, Sam, you heard there the Syrian foreign minister believes that basically there's some kind of anti-Syrian, a major anti-Syrian plan, and he says that this is something that has been stalling the crisis. Certainly this is Syria's kind of more official position, and he did tell us that he believes the timeline in solving the Syrian situation really depends on the amount of outside impact and outside support that the opposition has been getting on the ground.
As you know, RT's been covering the town of Malula in Syria, which has been a battlefield between al-Nusra Front rebel fighters and the Assad government. Did the Syrian foreign minister have anything to say about the town?
Right, we did address this issue, Sam. This is Malula is a village about 40 miles away from Damascus, where they have a very large Christian population and certain religious symbols, religious locations, and Christians living in that area were targeted by the rebels, and this has been something that's been a major concern. And we did ask the Syrian foreign minister what the situation is today and whether or not this place in particular is being helped by the government. This is what he told us.
They are trying to find ways and means to separate the Syrian people through threatening the Christian. They are doing massacres against the Christian. Our army is defending them, and Malula today is under the control of the Syrian army.
Obviously, the situation on the ground remains extremely complicated in Syria, but you know, there are hopes, of course, that with these diplomatic developments here at the United Nations, the international community should be a step closer to trying to find the political transition and the political solution they're hoping for on the ground.
Also making headlines in New York is the Iranian president. You know, we've seen him almost every day at the General Assembly, either speaking to the Assembly, talking with reporters. We now have this phone call between President Obama and President Rouhani. What does all this mean for talks about Iran's nuclear enrichment program?
Well, Sam, what this means is that Iran seems to be really another issue that has seen development here at the United Nations General Assembly session this year. A major change of tone. We know this breakthrough conversation finally happened between Barack Obama and the Iranian President Rouhani over the phone, the first dialogue between the two presidents, the presidents of these two countries in over 3 decades. And certainly with the new Iranian president, he has had lots of FaceTime here in New York City. He's had plenty of meetings, plenty of media appearances where he has been, and even in, of course, his address to the United Nations, has been saying that, look, we are ready to bring the tensions down. We are ready to communicate with the U.S. and the West, and we want to get rid of all concerns about our uranium enrichment program, which Iran has been saying for the longest time that it has peaceful purposes. But with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's previous Iranian president's really fiery personality and controversial and difficult relationship with the West, this has not been proven in any way. So now we have the Iranian president really making these steps to try to fix diplomacy with the West and the West again, and it seems like it's helping. And we know that Rouhani said that Iran will propose a resolution to the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, plus Germany, plus Iran, obviously, in these negotiations on the uranium enrichment program in October in Geneva, so we might see some breakthroughs there as well.
That was RT's Anastasia Churkina reporting from New York.